Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Threpticon. Today, we're going to talk about Hinduism. We're going to talk about the concept of Ahimsa and its influence on vegetarianism and dietary practices. So, what is this word, Ahimsa? So, it comes from Sanskrit, the sacred the sacred language of the Hindu religion. So, it's composed of the prefix a, meaning not, like in ancient Greek, a, and himsa, meaning injury, right? And it can be translated as nonviolence, harmlessness, but also in its original meaning, safety and security, kind of being away from harm yourself. Um, so I have several quotations. Today, this is the first. Vegetarianism and ahimsa are sometimes so closely associated by scholars and Hindus that the two terms seem to be interchangeable. Not every Hindu, however, is a vegetarian, and in the oldest period, the eating of meat was quite acceptable. Vegetarianism misses the authority of the Veda. However, it is a consequence of ahimsa rather than being entirely identical with it. So this is to say that ahimsa influences the idea of vegetarianism. It's not the exact same thing, but it definitely is part of it. Um, so this is the conclusion of that source. Asceticism formed the starting point of ahimsa. And though it cannot be definitely proved that this asceticism was non-Vedic, its association with the bloody rituals of the Vedic priests is out of the question. One may rather assume that ahimsa originally belonged to the ascetic anti-ritualism, which was especially represented by the heretics. I would put that in quotes, but the heretics, Buddhists and Jains, and only hesitantly obtained a foothold in the older Vedic Upanishads, where, however, it was never associated with ahimsa. It is only in Nirukta, so in a late addendum to this late text, that the opposition between the ritualists and the ascetics is connected with himsa and ahimsa, which is again an indication that the concept of ahimsa started to play a role only in the late phase of Vedism. So what are the Vedas? The Vedas are the original text, the base upon which Hinduism is founded. And they have their own history, right? There's early and late Vedas. So only the very latest of them show this influence from ahimsa, right? But then, that is to say, it is part of the entire canonical tradition. It's part of it, with an influence of other religions springing up in India, Buddhism, Jainism. You can see that influence there. And it has to do with asceticism, right? It's based on the idea of renunciation of the world, like the yogis do. It's pictured here. So definitely there's a change over time. In the Vedas, it's a book about horse sacrifices, about sacrifices to the gods, bloody ones. But then over time, Hinduism becomes more and more peaceful, right? Cows become a sacred animal, right? At a certain point for certain people. So we can definitely see this evolution over time, and it makes sense because Sanskrit is an Indo-European language. The Indo-European people were horse riding people who herded cattle. They were herdsmen. They were shepherds. They killed animals. They ate them. And it makes sense. They settled, they became civilized, and they became more and more vegetarian, which is what I think we should all do as a society, as a world society. Anyway, so if we go later in time, we jump ahead to the epic tradition, right? The Mahabharata. It describes vegetarianism. So I'll just read the second paragraph here. The vegetarian portion of these chapters of the Mahabharata may be summarized as follows. Bhishma tells Yudhishthira that the flesh of animals should be considered the same as that of one's own son, and that just as the union of mother and father produce offspring, so too does the union of meat and one's tongue produce attachment to material life. Those interested in spiritual advancement, says Bhishma, should never allow the two to meet. Bhishma further tells Yudhishthira that those who merely approve of animal slaughter are to be considered as violent and sinful, uh, as violent and sinful as those who engage in the killing itself. He notes that both the killer and the eater are equally guilty, right? So this idea of guilt, like a court of law, if you eat it, if you kill it, you're both guilty of the same crime. So I think this is a very important insight because a lot of people just kind of spontaneously think, oh, as long as I don't kill it, my wash my hands of it. But no, it's not. That's not the case. They're both guilty. Um, so as far as Hinduism is concerned, the Vaishnava tradition seems to be the most vegetarian friendly. Um, and it talks about the reasons for this as these concepts such as karma. Everyone's heard of karma. If you do something bad, it'll come back to you, right? So it's like a self-interest. I don't want to kill and eat animals because that I'll have that karmic guilt, that load against me. Second concept is sattva guna, a mode of goodness. So a Vaishnava aspires to live in goodness, which assures happiness and peacefulness. Right. So then talks about different foods. And these sattvic foods, the best foods are vegetarian foods. Anyway, and then we have the concept of himsa, which we've seen, non-violence, non-aggression. This is the beginning of selflessness, right? Caring about others, an important quality in the Vaishnava tradition. Here one steps outside of self-interest and feels for the suffering of others, right? So compassion. Number 4, jivedaya, compassion for souls. So the positive side of ahimsa, one should not only refrain from causing harm, but should also exhibit loving kindness to all. So this idea of ahimsa leading to love of others. Then this last concept here is naivedya, offering of food to the deity. Prasadam, literally the Lord's mercy, refers to the sacrificial remnants of vegetarian foods offered to the Lord. Eating such food spiritualizes the consciousness, enhancing one's devotion to the Supreme, right? And from what I understand, Krishna, which is the Lord in question, I believe, explicitly states in the Bhagavad Gita, I only want vegetarian offerings, basically. So therefore, if everything you eat has to be offered up to Krishna, you better give him what he demands, not meat. He doesn't ask for that. That would be sort of off the menu. So this is going back in time, but another interesting Hindu text, later text, outside the Vedas, but the laws of Manu. And Manu is very clear about the eating of animals. I mean, he makes no bones about it. He who injures innocuous beings, 45, he who injures innocuous beings from a wish to give himself pleasure never finds happiness, neither living nor dead. He who does not seek the cause he who does not seek the cause of the sufferings of bond and death to living creatures, but desires the good of all, obtains endless bliss. He who does not injure any creature attains without an effort what he thinks of, what he undertakes, and what he fixes his mind on. Meat can never be obtained without injury to living creatures, and injury to sentient beings is detrimental to the attainment of heavenly bliss. Let him therefore shun the use of meat, having well considered the disgusting origin of flesh and the cruelty of fettering and slaying corporal beings. Let him entirely abstain from flesh. So this is fascinating. He says very clearly, flesh is violent, there's no good way to get it, you have to avoid it, right? You're better off avoiding it. It's disgusting and it's detrimental to your own spiritual progress. So in summary, though it's a mixed practice, not all Hindus are vegetarians. However, there is a clearly strong concept. There is a conceptual notion for vegetarianism within the Hindu tradition, without a doubt. Here's my bibliography for today. And with that, I will say thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.